Hello, and welcome to the Breach Clarity webinar. I'm Eva Velasquez, President and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center, and I'm really excited to share this new consumer tool because it's having such a positive impact. I've been in the consumer protection and victim services space for more than 20 years, and I am so pleased to be a part of an effort that will provide more transparency and more meaningful information to consumers and victims of data breaches. Joining us for the webinar today is the inventor of Breach Clarity, Jim Van Dyke. Aside from being a mathematical wizard, he's also the founder of Javelin. Jim has served as an expert witness in our legal system regarding data breaches and the harm they create for those affected. More recently, he's graciously volunteered his time to sit on the ITRC board of directors, and he's just become a close personal friend and one in my circle of mission-driven professionals. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Eva. It's great to be here.
So I'll begin very briefly with some background on the Identity Theft Resource Center and how our collaborative partnership was formed, which has resulted in Jim's creation of the Breach Clarity tool. The mission of the ITRC is essentially to help victims and consumers mitigate and manage the harms caused by identity crimes. These include identity theft, of course, but also scams and fraud, data breaches, even cybersecurity and privacy issues. And we meet our mission through a variety of platforms. We really try to tackle this issue from soup to nuts, from beginning to end. So victim services as well as education to minimize your risk. So through our toll-free call center and live chat feature on our website, we've provided one-on-one assistance to victims and consumers. On average, it's about 10,000 individuals annually through just those two platforms. We also educate the public through our website, social media platforms, in-person presentations, our DOJ-funded ID Theft Help app, and our research and reports. All of these services are provided to victims and consumers at no charge to them, and frankly, people really want this information. The notion that people don't care about this issue, they're disinterested or they're apathetic is really just a false one, because we're having 600,000, 700,000, close to 800,000 visitors to our website on an annual basis. So people are actually absolutely craving this knowledge and understanding. Next slide, please. And as part of our research and reporting, I mentioned that was one of the ways that we help to educate the public. We started work in the data breach space about a decade ago, probably more than that. We began collecting the publicly available information regarding data breaches and compiling all that in one place. The database and the subsequent monthly reports that we issue have expanded and grown. And we're capturing more granular data more than ever and really putting it to the best use possible, which is to inform the public. So through this collaborative partnership with Jim, we've updated the data points that we collect in our database in order to make that information more valuable, more meaningful to victims of data breaches, and frankly, to enable the Breach Clarity algorithm to do its job. It takes a lot of man hours and time, and some of the folks listening to this webinar may wonder why we believe that our efforts are well placed here. And let me tell you that it's because we're hearing from victims and consumers every day. We talk to thousands of people every year, and they're not only telling us what happened to them, they also tell us how it made them feel, how it impacted their daily lives, and even how it's impacted their emotional and physical well-being. Slide 3, please. It's through this direct communication that we've come to understand that breach victims are scared and confused and full of questions. I'm just going to read off a few quotes that I pulled directly from some of our recent interactions, specifically with data breach victims. These are not identity theft victims. They have not had their information misused. It's been compromised, and it has still created these very strong feelings. The first one, I'm getting anxious, frustrated, and depressed. Another, I'm 81 years old, and this is so difficult for me to understand. Yet another, I certainly feel victimized right now. And while those quotes are indicative of what this is doing to consumers, and we hear things similar to that quite a bit, especially from our senior population, where this whole landscape is very challenging for them to understand. Far and away, the most common thing we hear from callers or people interacting with us is, what does this actually mean to me? And we view data breach notifications, whether it's coming in as a letter or an email or simply a media blitz, they're a puzzle, not a mystery. All of the pieces are presented in these notifications, or quite a few of them anyway. But consumers they lack the knowledge and understanding to put those pieces together and fully form that puzzle so that they can understand how this will actually impact them now. What is this doing to me right now? And what are the future impacts? What is this creating for me in the future? And so since we've been assisting people with this question through our call center for many years, on a one-on-one basis, we actually explain what the risk is to them on a specific breach, and based on the credentials that are compromised, and how they can reduce that risk. We provide them with an action plan that's very specific to what credentials have been compromised. And while this is good, and we'll still continue to do this for people that reach out to us directly through the call center or website, we really wanted to have a larger impact. We wanted to help more people. So when Jim approached us with the idea for being able to do just that, we jumped at the chance. And I know his formulation of this idea through our conversations. I know that it came about through his work as an expert witness. He too was involved in this space on a case-by-case basis, on a one-by-one basis. And we, put our heads together. How can we do more to help more people? And breach clarity came to be, and it's absolutely at the heart of our mission. So I'm really excited to hand this off to Jim and let him tell you more about what breach clarity is and how it works, and his take on how it came to be. So take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Eva. I really appreciate the opportunity to be working with you on this from the very beginning. You were very open when it was just a vision and just an idea and a concept, and probably the world's most complex spreadsheet that needed to be turned into a program. And you grasped it right away, and it's been a lot of fun to bring it to market. It's launched 3 weeks ago, and it'll be much bigger over time, as I'll explain in just a minute. So a quick background about myself, and then I'll dive right into explaining how it works. So as you mentioned, Eva, I am an expert witness in essentially nearly all the nation's largest data breaches. So I get hired to examine the nature of any particular data breach and understand, in order to create a report for the court, about what specific risks are raised for consumers, because breach clarity is all about putting people as identity holders first. And so from this work as an expert witness, which I continue to do today on a number of large breaches, I thought, I really want to get a tool in the hands of everyday people who are in digital banking, things that I've been a product manager on, or electronic shopping, commerce online, all that stuff, that products I brought to market. Really simplify the process of people understanding what they are at risk of specifically as a result of a breach and what they should do. So breach clarity is really a 1.0 or a first baby step toward even more things to come. Other quick backgrounds: I've launched a lot of products in, as I mentioned, in digital banking and security and fintech, as it's called, financial technology, and run one of the industry's largest identity fraud or identity theft research companies, which is a natural counterpart to the ITRC, which of course creates and maintains the largest database of data breaches. So research on the compromise. And it's important, as basic as it sounds, to remember that identity theft or identity fraud is really a two-crime crime. First, criminals have to get their hands on data that they have no business having. And second, then they use that data that they shouldn't have had access to in order to commit the identity theft or fraud or medical identity theft or all the different varieties. There are 11 in breach clarity, actually, in the 900 element algorithm. So with that, if we could just jump right to the next slide. The goal was to make consumer response as easy as 1, 2, 3. Breach clarity, again, it's a starting point in the basics, and there'll be a more advanced version that will be available for financial institutions and large employers to create. I just mentioned that in case anybody on the line is working for a financial services organization or payments firm or even a large employer, and you serve consumers, please know that the free version of Breach Clarity works a lot like what people in the industry call a freemium business model. And I'll just explain what that is, since that's kind of a technical term. That means there's a free version out there, and the expectation is that there's some place you can get an even more advanced version. And my goal is to never have consumers pay for anything because they didn't ask to have their data breached or become a possible victim of identity theft or fraud. And it's banks and others who generally pay the bulk of the losses. So I believe they'll license that. But if we can go to the next slide, as I said, I want to jump right into the demonstration and spend our time on how the product works. So there are literally thousands of data breaches that the ITRC loads in the database that really think of that, the database that underlies Breach Clarity is kind of like the equivalent of fuel that a vehicle runs on, and the vehicle being Breach Clarity's algorithms. And without getting too technical, it's again 900 elements. It looks at 11 types of fraud and up to 20 different action steps consumers can take. And it essentially looks at the nature of any breach as was publicly reported and says, you know, if those are what I think of as keys that you don't want to have in the fall in the wrong hands, identity criminals, people who want to commit identity theft or fraud, once those keys are out there, what kind of locks, if you will, are criminals in a better position to open? Of course, that they should have no business opening, but they can profit handsomely from if they do open. Well, so Breach Clarity says, well, if certain keys are exposed, then there's an increased likelihood of certain locks being unlocked that the breach victim doesn't want to have unlocked, of course. And that's essentially how it works. But having said that, there's all kinds of complexities that you would expect in an algorithm. So back to what you're seeing on the screen. This is a particular breach of the thousands that are in the database, with more going in all the time from the OPM. People that work in the industry will immediately recognize this as one of the worst breaches that's occurred. And that's why the score is a 10. And that score is intended over time to be instantly recognizable and even expected by media reporters. So if there's any reporters in the line, we want you to start using this. And we've designed it so you can easily cite that score. So there are some breaches we round everything up to a 2, because generally we don't want anyone to take a nonchalant view, but very few breaches will actually naturally score less than that. And we top everything out at 10. And so that's a severity score. It says, how worried should you be? And the idea is that if you were breached, you should always be worried enough to take action. But what's more significant are the two things inside the ovals, the dash red ovals. Starting with the lower left, here are the types of risks for this particular breach that are made most likely. And this is what the algorithm does, is computing this. And actually, I think we skipped a slide, so we want to go to the next one. There we go. And so for this particular breach, medical identity theft and new financial credit account fraud are the top 2 risks. And in case that seems obvious to anyone, it's actually not. I would not have guessed that prior to writing this algorithm, but the beauty of an algorithm is it always computes the same thing in the same way, and you have to force your biases out. And for example, there's a thing called a new financial deposit account. Criminals love that method, but credit reporting will never help you discover that. And so the prediction is important. On the upper right, those are the actions that best mitigate or protect against, whether it's prevention or detection or even resolution, the frauds, a variety of the 11 frauds that are in the model, and only the top 2 are shown on the left. Again, we're refining it, feel really great about the ones that are shown here. We'll show more over time in the premium model. And the cool thing is, if in case anybody's right now going on to either on their phone or their desktop computer and going to breachclarity.com, typing this in, you'll notice that anything underlined, you can hover over it and it gives you more detailed explanations. The ITRC logo is constantly shown through here because while some services actually charge money for call centers that do nothing but give you advice, ITRC does it for free because great organizations like federal law enforcement agencies and others give them grant funding. So and in the middle, you'll see the likely exposed ID records based on public records that feed the things that are on the left. So on the next slide, if we can go to that, you might be wondering, well, what about what the information people already get? Does that already provide some of this? Well, breach letters. I look at these for a living as a court expert witness, and I'll tell you, I rarely see one that I would give even passing grades to. I commonly see some that I would give an F or a D to. And here's a typical one that gets failing grades from a good organization, Home Depot, but they were breached and they weren't ready. They gave people credit monitoring for a card breach, payment card, like as in debit or credit. That makes absolutely no sense at all. It's like the equivalent of having a loose screw in maybe your car or on the wall of your home and using a hammer or pliers to try to alleviate that problem. You'll only make it worse. It's not even neutral. And this is common, sadly, because breached companies are reacting so fast to breaches and they have these tied up contracts. They give people the wrong tool. And it isn't even neutral. People are actually worse off because they're sent in the wrong direction. Literally everybody loses. So how does breach clarity, if we can go to the next slide, please. How does breach clarity handle this? When I formatted this, I deliberately cut off the bottom to zoom in a little bit. But if you were right now just typing in Home Depot or any other one of the thousands of breaches that are in there, and not to pick on Home Depot, this is sadly, substandard breach notices are quite the norm. But what you would see is a lower rating on the left, because in card breaches, you typically have much lower expected out-of-pocket losses. And as the ITRC's advisors would tell you, legally, you have zero liability, so that they'll advise you of what resources are there to try to get you to have zero losses. But more importantly, on the right, credit monitoring is not recommended. It's not in the top prioritized actions because it's sends someone in an unhelpful direction. What are recommended are the top 3 actions out of the many that are in breach clarity, selected by the algorithm in seconds, so that people can be told what to do in ways that will help them with that extra advice that pops up. So here it says, talk to your card issuer, your bank, whoever issued the card. Sometimes a reissue makes sense, sometimes it may not, depending on the individual's personal situation. And setting up all these cool activity alerts that financial providers now offer. There's just so many that are popping up. But in the future, breach clarity will actually have what technical people refer to as APIs, which are technical links that make breach clarity's output actually change the setting of these cool bank and credit union and then broker firms, alerts and transfer thresholds, all that great technical stuff that sets protection levels. So my point there on this slide was just to get people, whether you're an individual or a person working in industry or a media observer or an industry observer, to know that what you see in breach clarity now is just the start. And we have a long list of really exciting future capabilities that are intended to protect people even further. So on the last slide that I have, it essentially, and I'll hand things over to you in just a second, but this is actually the first screen that people see when people land on breach clarity, which is the place where you just enter the name of the place you were breached. And our goal is to get people to stop ignoring these data breach notification letters that the average person gets literally every year, and start to get people to take action and look out for the right things so we can put people first in identity safety and start to protect people. So thank you for your attention. Eve, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Now that we've essentially finished what's the product demo and given folks an understanding of how this works, we really just wanted to have a conversation, just a few minutes, about the things that we're hearing. Now that the product's been out for a couple of weeks, I'm getting lots of feedback and a fair amount of questions. So, I don't know about you, Jim, but the questions that I'm getting they're really valid and they're really useful. So I wanted to talk about those. One of the things that I'm hearing from some folks, they're telling me, well, I got my notification and it tells me everything that I need to do. So, why should I use breach clarity? Why should this help? And my feedback on that has been twofold. And first is, I think it's great that you got a notification letter, that you understood, and that you have enough background in this space, or a great enough understanding of how these things work, that you feel pretty well taken care of. My second piece of feedback is, it doesn't hurt to double check. As Jim stated before, breach notification letters really aren't as informative or transparent as we would like to see them be. So breach clarity helps to kind of decode what that letter is trying to tell you, and it certainly doesn't hurt. And additionally, with the action plans and the risks and harms being listed in a prioritized manner, I think it's going to be very helpful in telling people what to do first. So we specifically looked at, 2 harms and 3 actions to make this really intuitive for your end user, your average consumer, to go, okay, I understand what I have to do first. And then, of course, if you want to dive deeper and you want to take more of those steps, the ITRC, the Identity Theft Resource Center, is available to provide additional information, to walk you through the process. So there's a lot of support after you get the information from Breach Clarity. What are you hearing about, Jim? What are people telling you?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that people are just completely confused. And as you and I, as good, being good friends and work associates as well, we see that there's so much victim blaming going on, and allow me to just underscore this point a little bit, because I know we're both so passionate about it. You mentioned it earlier. There's so much of what I call victim blaming going on. People are commonly accused of being apathetic or reckless, especially if they're millennials for some reason, when it comes to security. And I've done a tremendous amount of rigorous research, both quantitative and qualitative, on the subject. And what I find is people care about protecting their assets, and they don't care somehow any less just because it's about their digital assets, like their identity records. So bringing that back to the breach notification letter, what I see are letters that are defensive on the part of generally the company that had the breach. They start out by telling people, we don't have any evidence that anybody became a identity theft or fraud victim. My thought is, it's a horrible idea to start out with that, because the companies haven't conducted appropriate research to even know that's true, and they haven't at the time. And this fraud that adds up to about $15 billion from my old company, Javelin's numbers each year, something's causing that identity theft and fraud. Odds are good it's a data breach or some kind of data compromise that led to it. So, my short answer that I'll end on and answer your question, Eva, is that people are confused and they're just sent in the wrong direction. They have pages and pages of just way too much without hitting on the right essential points, which is why Breach Clarity was created.
I couldn't agree with you more. I don't find consumers or victims to be apathetic at all. I think this space is very dynamic and challenging to stay on top of what's happening. I mean, we do this for a living and full time, and it's still a challenge. So your average person who's not working in this space, it would be impossible for them to keep up with it. So that's why I'm super pleased about this tool, because we've taken that guesswork out of it. It's just so meaningful. I can't wait for this to be adopted by more and more people, that they start using it and start building that understanding. So what are some of the other things that you're hearing out there, the questions that people are asking you?
One of the questions I'm hearing from people, it's really interesting. I hear this from both individuals, everyday people who don't work in the industry that you and I work in, as well as industry professionals. They're saying, well, I don't remember getting a breach notification letter, which is a fascinating thing to me. And for people listening to this webinar, just if you haven't worked at the early stages of new landscape shifting services, the creation of new big things, which Breach Clarity is intended to change the landscape of how people respond to a breach. So you you want to be very careful of not taking a piecemeal or very like kind of blinders on approach to saying, well, I don't know how this will work because people, are saying that they're not getting breach notification letters. Well, I mean, ITRC numbers alone last year, wasn't it something like 440,000 identities that were compromised last year?
Records, yes, it was over 400,000. I don't have the numbers memorized right now, but we're looking at hundreds and millions of different identity credentials and pieces. And I think that's where some of the confusion is created. Is most folks think I have a singular identity, which is true. You have your identity, but it is comprised of many, 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 many different pieces. And some of those are static, like your social security number, your date of birth, maybe a driver's license number. And then other pieces are very dynamic, like your behavior and where your cell phone, which tower it's pinging off of. These things change regularly, but all of those pieces go into your identity on the whole. And so when different pieces are compromised, it's very hard to understand the impact and keep up with that.
Right. And so for those, and I said thousands, thank you for getting that right and saying millions. I meant to say 440, it's about 400, over a million. And so the point is the average person in the US was probably notified more than once last year. And people with, with the US having, I think the population is about 360 million, if I remember. And so if we focus on just the adults who hopefully have most of the credit activity and in that group, and the average person who is an adult and in say an active, in buying and selling things, they're the ones that are getting breached the most. And here's the point that I want to make on this. People don't remember getting breach notices because breach notices are so substandard. And what breach clarity with the current version is just the very beginning is intended to change, is to get people to remember getting those emails and letters, because finally, once they can get the notice and then take that information with the help, hopefully, of the media, citing the breach clarity score and referring people to it, just like in earthquakes and hurricanes, they refer to the Richter scale, the Saffir-Simpson scale number. We want people through this free tool, and we want to get all future financial institutions and large employers on board to license future version and all that. So many, many distribution points. The whole point of this is people aren't remembering something today for good reason. It's mostly worthless, and that's a notification letter. It's worse than worthless. And once they can take that information, use breach clarity through thousands of partners to have it mean something. And they can also use other sources, like going directly to Equifax's website for literally half of all Americans. Or they can go to other sites like Have Them Pwned or whatever. People use in great number, but that's only for a small subset of the breaches. So you don't want to get too excited about that. But we'll connect to all those points, and people will start to use breach notification to give them real answers and take action.
I just want to make one final comment, and then we'll move on to the next thing that we're hearing out there. And as far as letters coming in the mail, one of the things I want to encourage the people listening to do is please open those notifications. I think that a reason people may not remember getting a notification is that they simply didn't take that next step, whether it's an email notification or coming through snail mail. We've done a great job in telling people, not to respond to strange emails that they weren't expecting and not to click on links. And people are overwhelmed with junk mail, but it's also quite possible that you're looking at a notification from your credit card or your bank or something that's coming into you as this is probably just junk mail and I'm not even going to bother to open it. And I would encourage people to just go ahead and open it and read it and see what they're saying. And if it turns out it is junk mail, well, then you can shred it. But at least you might get some knowledge about something that's going on with your identity or your identity credentials that you didn't have before. And I won't belabor that anymore. So, are you hearing any questions about paid services and things like that, along with breach notifications, Jim? Because I am.
Yeah, I hear a lot of questions about paid services. So, and LifeLock or Identity Guard or Easy Shield or the three credit reporting, three credit bureaus offer them, and so there are like 30 companies in this space, and there's a lot of confusion around that. And while I found that people very much have a love or hate relationship with these companies, I have found that the employees that work for these firms and that are trying to develop the consumer-facing solutions, in my experience, are working very hard to protect people. Now, having said that, I was on the board of the CFPB and as a volunteer, and one of the first actions of the CFPB was to penalize bad marketing actions on behalf of a few players, which sadly included a few financial institutions. So there's been some bad behavior in this paid protection sector area, and there are also some valuable solutions, things that legitimately consumers cannot do on their own. So all that adds up to a lot of confusion. But think of breach clarity. Even my answer to your question, I think, around this confusion is that breach clarity is really designed to, again, bring clarity about what people should prioritize. And the 3 action steps that are there are just the beginning. And I deliberately took all reference to paid services out for the initial launch just to keep it pure. And it won't be too long, and then I'll add on some of those recommendations for paid services as well. Do you have anything to add on to that topic, Eva?
I would only say that our position at the ITRC is that these services, in full disclosure, we receive financial support from some of these organizations because they do believe in our mission and they realize that not everyone can afford to pay for a service. And that's a real challenge that many people have. And so we always let people know that, one, if you can't afford to pay for a service, we are here for you. And there's a lot that you can do yourself, and there's a lot that we can show you and that you can take advantage of. But the reality is there are some things that these entities, that these products and services can do for you that you could not do on your own, whether it's really not having the ability to, build your own algorithm for fraud analytics, or just the time involved in things like public record data scraping. So if you are an individual that has decided that you can spend some of your disposable income for this protection, just do your homework and make sure that you are getting something that fits your needs and that's right for you, because they can have value. But also don't abdicate all responsibility. It's sort of like having, insurance for your car. Yes, you're covered in the event that something goes wrong and you have that peace of mind. However, you're not going to go out and start driving like a maniac because there are repercussions. So really that same principle applies. And that's really our take on that one. And of course, for folks that have additional questions or need extra help, that's something that ITRC can provide at no cost to them. The other thing that I'm hearing, and we're almost wrap this up because there's just a few things I want to cover, is that some folks have said, I looked for a data breach. It happened actually a while ago, and I didn't find it in the database. And I want to let everyone listening know that we have gone back a couple of years, and we are continuing to backfill all of the previous breaches, but it's going to take time because it's something that requires manpower. It can't be automated. But future breaches, we are staying very current on what's happening right now. So recent breaches are in there, and over time, we will get to the breaches that happened previously. But if you really do have a question about something that isn't in there, you can always reach out to the ITRC. You can call our toll-free number, 888-400-5530, and ask us and say, hey, this breach isn't in there, we'd like to see it. And then we will put that on the top of the list and we'll enter it. We've got a turnaround of about 48 business hours for that. And then just in closing, is there anything else that you're hearing out there, Jim, that we haven't covered yet?
I don't think so. No, it's great to get the response. We had, We've had some individuals as well as even reporters, CNET, Slashdot, a lot of others cover it, and it's just a really fun time. So it's great to be working with you on it, and we'd love any comments people have. There's a contact us form on the site, or you can route them through your customer service people, Eva. We'd love to get feedback because for me, it's all about putting people first. Identities represent people in the digital age, and this is all about protection and digital empowerment for individuals more than anything.
Oh, that's so true. Identities represent people first, and I love that, and that's a great way for us to close. And everyone that's listening, this tool was created to make your life easier, to stop the confusion. So please use it, share that it's available, and if you have feedback, you can contact us. So thank you, everyone, for listening.